Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, a new novel about two girls and an astronomy textbook draws inspiration from one of the quietest places in West Virginia.
I remember driving through West Virginia as a kid and seeing the Green Bank telescope for the first time, and you feel like you're on another planet.
Author Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle talks about growing up as part of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
It's not all that different of a childhood, but then you start recognizing the special parts of it when you go away and come back and kind of have your eyes opened a little bit.
And a Kentucky tattoo artist practices traditional tattooing and traditional music. He says they're not too different.
I am executing a design that originated over 100 years ago at this point. Those are like the folk songs.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia.
Support for this program is brought to you by Solar Holler, helping Appalachian businesses and nonprofits manage energy costs through solar power. Information at solarholler.com. Support for this program is provided by the Thrasher Group, an architecture, engineering, and field services firm serving West Virginia clients and communities since 1983. More information at thethrashergroup.com.
Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. A new novel for young adults captures a slice of life in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. It tells the story of a friendship between two high school students as they unravel a decades-old mystery. It's the debut novel by Jessica Walker. Jessica Walker, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is your debut book, and it's kind of an unusual one. How did you land on this idea of having two high school students become secret pen pals by writing notes to each other in an old textbook?
So the idea really started as a question, like a lot of ideas do. And that question for me is, how is it possible that we as a human species are developing technology to talk to life forms like hundreds of light years away, but we can't figure out how to talk to our neighbor down the street who shares 99.9% of our DNA, but doesn't share our political views? And so I'm really interested in that divide, which is often rural-urban divide. And so the two main characters in this book, they could not be from more opposite ends of our country's political spectrum, but they find a very unique way to connect unexpectedly and inside a shared book where they keep their deepest, darkest secrets, and we get to join them on this very exciting mystery, which is also a coming-of-age story. I've always been fascinated by random encounters as a way to connect with people. I know that they say not to talk to strangers, but I never really took that advice in my life. I was the type of kid who would leave a Post-it note in a random library book and with a question on it and hope that somebody would write back to me. Nobody ever did, but I don't see that practice of leaving a Post-it note really as any different than sending a radio signal out into the universe and hoping that someone or something responds back.
Would you mind reading an excerpt from the book just to give us a little flavor of what it reads like?
I'm going to read from page 105, and this is Kepler. She's the West Virginia native in the book, and she's really tired of the other character in the book, Copernicus, who's from California. She's really tired of her using the terms redneck and hillbilly interchangeably without really understanding the nuance between those two words. Rednecks are everywhere. I'm sure you can even find them in your beloved state of California. Rednecks like to be aggressive and drive vehicles with either abnormally large tires or extremely loud mufflers, or both. Hillbillies, on the other hand, are more Appalachia specific. They can heal any sickness with plants from their garden, play music with spoons and washboards, and understand how to do a whole lot with very little. My granny told me that hillbillies absorb ancient wisdom from mountain water that starts out as snow in the winter As it melts and trickles down into the swimming holes by summer, it picks up minerals from every rock and pebble along the way. We are literally made of mountains around here.
Thank you for reading that. What led you to set this story in West Virginia, and specifically Pocahontas County near the Green Bank Telescope?
I remember driving through West Virginia as a kid and seeing the Green Bank Telescope for the first time, and you feel like you're on another planet. You're in the middle of rural Appalachia, you're surrounded by dairy barns and a Dollar General and hay fields, and all of a sudden this amazing piece of technology rises out of the earth. I've always just been fascinated with that area. And many years later, after I grew up and I went to college, I took a bunch of astronomy classes. I don't quite have the brain for astrophysics. I'm more of an artist, but I took as many astronomy classes as I could. And we learned about the Green Bank Observatory and the National Radio Quiet Zone and how it's an epicenter for the search for extraterrestrial life. And I'm fascinated by that. And the telescope itself, it's massive. It's the size of a football stadium in the air. And standing next to it is completely humbling. And it can point in any direction. I've learned a lot about it. I got to visit as part of the research for the book. And scientists from all over the world are coming to Green Bank to use this amazing piece of technology to search for patterns in radio waves that might indicate life beyond our Earth. Appalachia, aliens, like how could you not want to write a story in Green Bank, West Virginia? It's an amazing place.
So it's a very deliberate choice to set this story there. It does have ramifications for what happens in the book. So once you decided on that setting, how did you move forward? How did that choice affect how you wrote this story in terms of characters and plot?
So even now, in our age of constant connection, teenagers in Green Bank have to be really creative with how they communicate because texting and social media aren't always as immediately available to them. And I was just really interested in that idea. Any kind of device in Green Bank, a cell phone, a kitchen microwave, could potentially interfere with what the telescope is doing in its sensing of the universe. And that really drove the book's direction and how the characters have to communicate with one another.
I'm interested in hearing your perspective on the mountains as someone who grew up in the region and then moved to New York about 20 years ago. I know for a lot of folks, they have a complicated relationship with their home community, but sometimes moving away provides some clarity. Can you talk a little bit more about your connection to Appalachia and sort of how the move to New York shifted it or changed it?
My people are from McDowell County, West Virginia. My grandmother was from Welch, and my grandfather grew up in Gary, West Virginia, what they call number 10 mine back in the U.S. Steel days. So I definitely have family roots in that part of the world. On the other side of my family's from Wise County, Virginia, and I grew up down the road in Washington County, Virginia. And I lived there until I was the ripe old age of 18. And then I decided I had to get out of there and run away to California, actually, and live in San Francisco because I just thought that would be the coolest thing to do. And it was. And I don't regret it, but I learned a lot of things in the move away from Southwestern Virginia. Being a kid that grew up in Southwestern Virginia means you have this really playful connection to the land, I think. You get into a lot of good country trouble. You are really immersed in nature. And this is a very different experience than the way I'm raising my children in Brooklyn, which for better or for worse, I think we all have our childhoods and learn interesting things. But I moved away a long time ago, but this place of Appalachia is in my blood and it continues to humor me and haunt me in ways that just seem to come out as stories. So I really hope that readers experience a new perspective on rural Appalachia, and in particular, in the book through Kepler's perspective. She's the one that's born and bred in Pocahontas County. We do see some of the challenges that young Appalachian folks are more likely to face: lack of resources or opportunities for higher education or incarcerated family members. But Kepler's character really grapples with the stereotypes, and she brings depth and nuance to her situation. And she also recognizes the ways that she has to change and adapt her thinking. I hope readers will find that relatable, and maybe they'll learn something too.
So the characters in the book, you mentioned one of them, Kepler. The other is known as Copernicus. These are references to historic astronomers, and the characters deliberately make the choice to remain anonymous to sort of keep their correspondence clean and not muddy it with their rest of their lives. So I'm curious, though, for teenagers like Copernicus and Kepler, who may or may not love where they live, but they feel constrained, what advice do you have for teenagers like that?
So advice is an interesting word. I might put it under the heading of offerings, just to protect myself a little bit. I work with Gen Z a lot, and I have 2 young kids. So offerings may be more applicable here. Evolutionary biology tells us that perhaps we're not supposed to love where we're from. If we always loved where we're from, we would never leave. And it's our biological duty to spread our genetics. So it's quite human of you if you are a teenager who doesn't love where they're from. If you feel constrained in this feeling of not loving where you're from, you're not alone in that. And I would say that writing about it or making art about where you're from and finding some lens to channel that through, I highly recommend humor and satire and drama, and try to bring light to what you know about your perspective. Your authorial voice is very powerful. You can write, people will listen, and no one will have your perspective on that place that you're from. And you can drive a way that they might think about it differently. And one day you might leave and you're far away from home and you look back and you realize where you're from is actually really amazing and beautiful, and it shapes who you are, and you'll never get rid of it as a part of you.
Jessica Walker, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us.
Thank you.
The Secret Astronomers lands in stores in early November. It's available from Penguin Random House. A lot of us experience fall foliage through the windows of our cars or by looking up from the forest floor. But WVPB News Director Eric Douglas brings us another way to experience autumn splendor: from the air.
Since the New River Gorge Park and Preserve became the newest national park in 2020, visitors from all over the world have flocked to the area. Visitations reached nearly 2 million last year. The fall is especially beautiful with walls of trees changing to shades of red, yellow, and orange. But sometimes it is difficult to see the forest for the trees. The best way to get around that is to get up and above it. Bill Chenard is a pilot in Fayetteville. He takes passengers on one-on-one excursions around the New River Gorge, Summersville Lake, and surrounding areas.
You know, this isn't a carnival ride where we load up 10 or 15 people and we slap you on the back and we just go for it. Each ride is really tailored to the individual's experience, their comfort zone, what they want to do.
On a recent Monday, I went to Fayetteville to meet Chenard and see his operation. A yellow and blue vintage aircraft is the main attraction of Wild Blue Adventure Company in the Aviators Lounge in Fayetteville.
Well, we have a 1943 Boeing Stearman. They, of course, were a primary trainer in the Second World War. They taught young men in the Army Air Corps and the Navy Air Corps to fly. It was the first plane that most of them would have flown.
Chenard explained that after the war, this plane became a crop duster and then was found in a barn in the 1980s. It was restored with upgrades such as radios and a bigger engine. Rebecca Kane from Frackville, Pennsylvania, made the trip to the gorge and had to take a ride in the Stearman.
I came to explore the gorge, and then I did a little research, and I saw that there's plane rides that do some cool tricks. I was like, I gotta do it.
Before getting in the plane, Kane said she thought the flight would be pretty awesome.
I'm going to load you from the left side. You'll see there's a black part on the wing, and that's where you want to step when you load. The yellow part is fabric, and your foot could go right through it.
That was Ashley Chenard, Bill's wife, beginning the safety briefing. Both Ashley and Bill stressed that even though they do some adventurous flying, they take safety very seriously. Back on the ground, Rebecca Kane said she was still giddy, but she did have a favorite move in the air.
Maybe doing the loop-de-loop. That was pretty fun, like 2 rolls in it at once. That was pretty fun.
Then it came my turn to strap in. We taxied to the end of the runway, and then he spun the plane around, and we built up speed. The steerman rose off the ground quickly, and we were aloft. Feeling the wind in your face and seeing all around is fantastic.
We have basically predetermined paths. We're going to do a 20-minute ride where we're going to see Hawks Nest Dam and the big bridge and Fayetteville and Endless Wall and a big chunk of the national park here in Fayetteville, which is always amazing, but especially this time of year.
We flew about 2,000 feet off the ground, making it easy to see everything, but it still felt close up. Back on the ground, after flying over the airstrip to scare away deer that were grazing in the evening, Chenard said he thought this was the best flying around.
We're into our 7th season, actually, yeah, so we're right at 1,000 hours of rides given.
I've rafted the New River and swam in Summersville Lake. I've taken the Bridgewalk tour and watched base jumpers fling themselves into the air on Bridge Day. But seeing it all from above in an open-air cockpit definitely lent a new perspective to all of it. And I agree, the loop-de-loop was great. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, this is Eric Douglas in Fayetteville, West Virginia.
Coming up, a conversation with acclaimed Appalachian author Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for WVPB is provided by the Huntington Museum of Art, presenting Joyful Spirits, Haitian art from the Winslow Anderson Collection through February 8, 2026. Details at hmoa.org.
Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle is an acclaimed Appalachian author who lives in Cherokee, North Carolina. Clapsaddle's debut, Even As We Breathe, was the first novel published by an enrolled citizen of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. She's also the 2025 Appalachian Heritage Writer-in-Residence at Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. WVPB's Liz McCormick spoke with Clapsaddle about her writing and the importance of reclaiming Cherokee identity through literature.
Annette, would you start off our conversation by reading a passage from your work that you feel really captures what it means to be Appalachian?
This is while County, a 19-year-old Cherokee man, is in Asheville contemplating kind of the dichotomy of being really kind of from these two places. And he had recently found an animal bone. I had certainly seen my fair share of animal bones, either happening upon them in the woods or excavating them from a fresh hunt. Something felt different about this one. I couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was because it was in Asheville, an environment I assumed was devoid of elemental remnants such as discarded bones, cast-off feathers, and rock faces that scowl like relatives. There was brick and concrete and glass and steel in Asheville. For certain, anything else seemed misplaced. The bone in such tangible shape reminded me of home and what I loved about home, the simplicity of knowing what each day held and the certainty that people said what they meant and meant what they said. There were no flashy distractions, but there was strength, there was resolve, and they were foundational. I knew exactly where I stood and when to stand there. I had wanted so badly to fit into the shine of Asheville, but it never seemed to fit me. Back home, being Cherokee meant I fell into a role. Unfortunately, it also meant I had only a few options. I could farm, I could work for a white man, I could leave. I learned that pretty quickly in school. They instructed us in the trades, but they were trades to stay, to exist, to fit into a slot already carved out for me. Sure, it was safe in a lot of ways. I didn't worry that I had to starve. My family and church and neighbors saw to it that no one would starve. But oh, the hunger. I always felt half empty, like I was missing out on some grand feast just over the mountains. I was tethered in all the good ways and in all the bad. And so I like to say that's just when he's trying to figure out himself, but County definitely comes to understand the beautiful complexities of the region as well.
And that makes me think Appalachians, I feel, as a group, sort of struggle with this, should I stay, should I leave? Share with us a bit more about why you chose that passage, why it really connects with you as what it means to be Appalachian.
Sure. So I think it's exactly what you said, that especially as a young person growing up, and this is probably true of everywhere. You think the grass is greener somewhere else, right? It can feel as though this is a place that's limiting. But the book itself, as it goes on, is really a testament to all the opportunities that can be at home. So I wanted this passage to bring out definitely the history of the region, because this is, set in 1942. But it also is an indication of the spirit of the place that remains today.
I want to ask you to talk a little bit about what it was like for you growing up and learning about your culture and your heritage.
Yeah, I often tell people that growing up in Cherokee is not that different in a lot of ways from growing up anywhere in a rural community in Appalachia. So, my youth was spent largely outside. My parents had gift shops in Cherokee, so while everybody else was at the beach in the summer, I was in the river, the Oconee River, behind the shop with my cousins and my brother playing until I was old enough to see above the counter in the gift shop and then be working there. So, but it felt like, when I look back on it, it feels very much like a free-range childhood to some extent. And that's not uncommon for any childhood in the area in Western North Carolina. The difference being is that it's constantly peppered with elements of culture that I didn't even realize until I went away. That's the point where I realized I'm from a different culture. I didn't realize how little the rest of the country knew about indigenous populations. I didn't realize I'd spend the rest of my life explaining who we are, which is fine, and it's a responsibility I'm happy to have. So I grew up hearing a little bit of the language. I'm not fluent. That's something that we are working hard as a tribe, and actually all three Cherokee tribes are working really hard to revitalize our language. But the stories are a little bit different, than Appalachia. The arts are a little bit different. It's not all that different of a childhood, but then you start recognizing the special parts of it when you go away and come back and kind of have your eyes opened a little bit.
And for those listeners who are just learning about you, talk with us a little bit more about your debut novel. Why did you write it, and why was it titled Even As We Breathe?
Yeah, so Even As We Breathe was an idea that came about when I saw a newspaper article in the Asheville Citizen-Times newspaper about the role of the Grove Park Inn the summer of 1942. And the newspaper article was largely about Asheville's role in general during World War II, talking about the Biltmore House safeguarding works of art. But there was this little paragraph that described how the Grove Park held Axis diplomats and foreign nationals as prisoners of war just one summer. And it was fascinating to me because I'm from the area, have lived there most of my life, and most folks were not very familiar with that history. So it allowed me to write a fictional narrative to fill in the gaps. And that's exciting to me when there's some grounding in history, and then I get to create a story around it. But it also was this really cool place and time to talk about really contemporary issues, race, class, citizenship. All of these questions are coming up during this time at this place. And so I realized that I could take County, a member of a sovereign nation who's very close by to Asheville, and kind of throw him in the mix, and then see what other questions would come up about how do we decide who belongs in our community. And that's really where this title comes from. The point being that why not make decisions about who belongs in our communities, however you define community, by the human spirit, as symbolized by the breath, instead of all of these very temporal things like the color of our skin or our DNA, right? Don't we want people that share a common, not even just common, but a welcome human spirit?
You gave a keynote lecture during Shepherd University's Appalachian Heritage Week. That keynote lecture you gave was about Cherokee literature, and it was titled Reclaiming Identity Through Literature. Can you talk with us a little bit about some of the key points you made in that lecture?
Sure. So I think every author at our core wants to just be able to tell a story, right? But sometimes we're coming from a place that is less familiar for our readers, and so we have different responsibilities. And since this is the first novel by an enrolled citizen of our tribe, I know that I have a responsibility to portray this place and these lives and this culture in the most authentic way possible, also with the understanding that I am not the only voice, of my tribe. And in the lecture, I'd like to begin with a quote from a Native scholar, Craig Womack, who talks about aesthetics, and he talks about if we don't define our own aesthetics, someone will define them for us. And that's really happened with Native literature throughout the history. That's where we get these stereotypical Native character figures that are really problematic. And I try to make the point that it's not just, you've got these caricatures of people. This language and these ideas about human beings translate into law. There are similarities in some early colonial and American literature that was written by non-Native people that included Native people caricatures. There's similar language in that to speeches to Congress promoting federal Indian removal in the 1830s. Literature becomes law. Law is literature. And so I think that's a huge responsibility that we have. And I also want to balance that with being a storyteller and not assuming I should tell my readers what's right and wrong, right? That's not my job. It's to ask the questions, and it's to provide different perspectives on different issues through my characters.
That was an excerpt from a conversation with Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, who was speaking with Liz McCormick. Her novel, Even As We Breathe, is this year's One Book, One West Virginia Common Read. To hear a longer version of their conversation, visit our website, wvpublic.org. John Haywood of Whitesburg, Kentucky, says he got his first guitar and his first tattoo when he was about 13 years old. These days, Haywood is the proprietor of Parlor Room Art and Tattoo in downtown Whitesburg. It's a place where some people get inked up, and some play traditional string band music. It's a place unlike any other. Earlier this year, Folkways reporter Zach Harold sent us this.
From the time John Haywood was a kid, he had two loves, art and music. When all his cousins were playing sports, John just wanted to draw and play guitar. Eventually, he figured out a way to marry his two loves. After all his favorite rock and rollers were covered in tattoos.
And I started drawing tattoos on myself and on my friends, and with markers and fancy pens. It got to where people would ask me to draw a tattoo on them in school, and with just like a marker. And we were so fascinated by it that when the opportunity came to get a real one, we jumped.
Well, real is a relative term. It was a real tattoo in the sense that John still has it, It was a little less than real because he got it from a friend's older brother who did it using some purloined art supplies.
He used sewing needle and thread and India ink that I got from my middle school. Between the art department and the home ec department, I was able to get everything I needed to do a tattoo.
Luckily, John's career as a thief was short-lived. His passion for art was not. He went on to study art at Morehead State University and later in grad school at the University of Louisville. Then, finally out of school and unsure what to do next, John was offered an apprenticeship under Big Daddy Trey Benham, a tattooer in Fort Knox, Kentucky. But big city living grew tiresome after a while. John moved back to eastern Kentucky and, needing a way to make money, started looking for a job as a public school art teacher. Until one fateful conversation with another job candidate.
We were actually in line to do like the drug test, where you pee in the cup and all that. And I was drawing up a design, and the guy said, "Man, if you can draw and all that stuff, why are you doing all this with us? Having to pee in the cup, having to, answer the Board of Education, having to just hope you're going to get hired, and all this." He's like, "Why don't you have your own shop?" And it stuck. I was like, I don't know, why don't I have my own shop? I was apprenticed under a good tattoo artist who was apprenticed under a great tattoo artist, and there's really something to that in tattooing.
So John gave up on the school system. He found a former pharmacy in downtown Whitesburg, Kentucky, and he opened his own shop, the Parlor Room. That was 13 years ago. John's shop has since outgrown its original basement space and now occupies the whole first floor, the walls of which are covered with an overwhelming amount of art, even by tattoo shop standards.
The lobby pretty much serves as kind of an art gallery, just to kind of vibe the place up, make sure there's plenty of designs and flash and inspiration around, because everybody tends to bring in a lot of the same old on the internet, so we try to keep a unique sort of something to kind of get their brains maybe looking at just some art, or maybe looking at some traditional books and stuff like that.
Some of that art is from John, some is from his kids, his friends, and clients. Some of it is from the shop's other artists. The Parlor Room now boasts 5 tattooers in all. 2 of them are John's own apprentices.
You can go online and learn, find somebody explaining everything you want to know about this. But what you don't get from that is the importance of learning how to connect with clientele, seeing like what they may be going through when they come through the doors.
The Parlor Room has its own unique way of connecting with clients. Hang around on a slow day and somebody will pick up one of the musical instruments laying around and start an impromptu jam session. If he doesn't have a tattoo gun in hand, John will be right in the middle of it, picking on his banjo. And those banjo stylings are the result of another important apprenticeship in John's life. Around the time he was planning to move back from Louisville, he did an art show here in Whitesburg to sell some of his paintings.
So I was doing a lot of banjo-y kind of paintings too, like old timers playing the banjo. And at some point or another, I did an art show at Apple Shop, and George Gibson came by, saw the art show, bought a painting or two, and left me with an album of his.
John had been aware of George Gibson for a while at this point. They kept crossing paths at music festivals. John knew George was both an accomplished banjo player and also a historian of the instrument. George learned to play from his neighbors in Knott County, Kentucky, soaking up a regional, traditional banjo style that had largely been forgotten as the instrument came to be associated with commercial bluegrass music.
So he would learn a lot of stuff from people that didn't even own instruments but could play a song or two or remember.
George later moved to Philadelphia and then Florida, becoming a successful businessman. But his love for banjo kept him coming back to Kentucky. When he ran into John at that art show, he saw something in this young artist and offered him a deal. In exchange for 1 painting a year, John could live in a house on George's Knott County property and study banjo with him.
And I was like, oh, there's someone still alive today that still plays this old Knott County style banjo that I'm so fascinated with. Like, we never really did too many like lessons. A lesson would be like him telling me these stories about the people, or him saying like, encouraging me to read some kind of book, or just sometimes me just sitting down on the porch with him while he played.
Through these informal lessons, John began to absorb the banjo styles that George had spent his whole life studying. Now, John doesn't just play banjo between tattoos. He regularly plays gigs and festivals all over Kentucky and beyond. He's appeared on Tyler Childers' gospel album, Can I Take My Hounds to Heaven, and has recorded banjo albums of his own, including one taped right here at the Parlor Room. While tattoos are usually associated with rock or hip-hop music, John sees a strong connection between his study of banjo and his study of tattooing.
The practice of traditional tattooing is almost exactly like the practice of traditional music. There are designs that were done and executed in the past of, say, an eagle done by someone like Sailor Jerry. As a traditional tattooer, when someone wants something like that, I go to that as the reference. I am executing a design that originated maybe 100 years ago, over 100 years ago at this point. Those are like the folk songs.
But whether we're talking about tattoos or banjo, John is careful who he shares these hard-won lessons with.
It's the see me now, hear me later. You ever heard someone say that to you? I had sketchy neighbors there. Got a tattoo machine one time. Stopped me in the middle of the road. Man, he asked me how the thing worked. And I told him every single thing about it. You're supposed to keep that secret, all these secrets. I told him everything about it, standing in the middle of the road, and then said, well, man, I'll see you later, I gotta go to work. There was so much knowledge. He's not gonna understand any of that unless he goes the path of actually trying to figure that out.
It's the same thing with banjo. Sure, the stakes are quite a bit lower. Nobody's getting permanently scarred from a bad rendition of Sally Gooden. But John can't pass down any of this knowledge he's gleaned from years of study.
But it's not going to even matter. It's probably going to waste our time if you're not ready for it.
Here's the thing, though. Artists like John dedicate years of study to their art, learning history and technique. And they bring all of that knowledge to bear, whether they're standing on stage or jabbing ink into somebody's bicep. Yet the whole point of all that practice and all that study and all that work is to create art of such depth that you and I can appreciate it without a lifetime of study. We don't need all that knowledge in our heads or our hands because we can just feel that it's good. That's certainly true with music. Whether you've heard a song before or not, whether you know its history or not, when it's good, you just feel it. And John says it's the same way with tattoos.
It's funny what tattooing does for folks, and it's when you put something on someone and they walk out of here you see them feeling better about something, and it feels pretty good to know that you can do that for someone.
For Inside Appalachia, I'm Zach Harold in Whitesburg, Kentucky.
That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. For a video Zach made about parlor room art and tattoo, visit our website, wvpublic.org. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most visited national park in the U.S., but it's had a challenging couple of years. First, damage from Hurricane Helene in 2024, and now the federal government shutdown. At a time when visitors are swarming the park for fall colors, National Park Service employees have been furloughed. For the Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom, WUOT's Pierce Gentry reports that local governments and nonprofits are stepping up to foot the bill.
The sound of dry leaves crunching beneath feet is a sure sign that fall is on its way, and with it, cooler weather. In the first weeks of October, thousands of people flocked to Great Smoky Mountains National Park to get an early taste of the season. Ray Nelson is visiting from upstate New York. He says he's happy that local governments and groups in the region have agreed to pay most of the Smokies' 275 full-time employees to keep the park open during the ongoing government shutdown.
When there's a big tragedy, people step up, and I think that's just fine.
For the first 3 days of the shutdown, visitors arriving to the park for the fall season were met with road closures and a shortage of park rangers. Sevier County, home to major attractions like Dollywood and Gatlinburg, depends on the Smokies as an anchor for its tourism-driven economy. Vice Mayor Brian McCarter says they couldn't handle losing the park for an indefinite amount of time, especially after a year of slow tourist traffic attributed to Hurricane Helene.
If that place is not open, yeah, there's still things here for people to do, but the perception amongst a lot of folks is, well, then Sevier County must be closed. And so we have to make sure that that opens to drive that economy, to allow our tourists to come in and be able to experience everything we have here.
When the shutdown began October 1st, Sevier County quickly formed an agreement with state and local governments in Tennessee and North Carolina to commit nearly $2 million to keep the national park staffed and fully open for up to 30 days.
And having the national park open that quickly was a big boost, I think, here locally for our tourists. And
this isn't the first time that the federal government has failed to keep the Smokies open. In 2018, during the nation's longest shutdown that lasted 35 days, local governments banded together to keep the park running during tourist season. Here's Tennessee Governor Bill Lee.
This has happened before, and we understand how important Smoky Mountains are to people, so we're making sure that if people are thinking about coming to Tennessee to come to the Smokies, come right on down. It's going to be beautiful.
Now, park visitors are flooding the entrance to Cades Cove, a scenic drive on the south end of the park, which is most popular during October. It's open thanks to the local dollars that are filling the gap left by the shutdown. The Friends of the Smokies, a local nonprofit which supports the park, will give $45,500 a week to keep it open. Spokesperson Jim Matheny says it's essential for the park to remain staffed, comparing visiting a national park with no rangers to visiting Disney World without Mickey Mouse.
Because even if you had places that you could get to, there's a big difference between it being accessible and being fully staffed, where you have rangers and you have people who can respond to emergencies.
Around the country, some parks remain open without staff in key places. Others are completely closed. Those who are paying the staff at Great Smoky Mountains National Park say they can keep this up for about a month and hope to get their money back when the federal government restarts. I'm Pierce Gentry.
When Clint Bowman of Black Mountain, North Carolina, couldn't find the writing group he needed, he formed the Dark City Poet Society. Bowman used the group to develop his poetry, some of which explores people and their connection to nature. Early last fall, Bill Lynch spoke with Bowman about his collection, If Lost.
Would you like to read something?
I was going to read basically the title poem for the whole book. So If Lost, it happens at the very end, but I feel like it kind of captures the collection pretty well. So I'll read If Lost. Look around, establish your bearings. Take note of the scratched hemlock where the trail turns south. Don't rely on wives' tales or the growing patterns of moss. Notice nature warn itself of your intrusion. That warbler isn't singing to you. It's alerting the bear around the bend. Know your way out so you can tell someone lost one day. Go downhill if disarrayed. Act like water. Don't be afraid.
Tell me about that poem, which also kind of leads into the whole idea of the collection, which is broken into three parts, right? You've got establish your bearings, notice nature, don't be afraid. Talk about that poem and then kind of branch into the collection.
So the whole idea of it actually originally came to me whenever there's maps all over. I had to go out hiking a ton, and I do it a lot for my job and just for on my spare time as well. And there was a map of the area that actually said, if lost, ? And then it just said, go downhill. And that was all they said. And so that kind of started the whole idea of these sayings that people have for what to do if lost. And so then I ran with that idea and put together If Lost, the poem, throwing in things like the wives' tales and the moss and the way that moss grows on trees and to go downhill and act like water. I kind of wanted to loop that all back into how everyone, I feel like, is lost in some way. The book is split up into 3 different sections. Each section is a line from this poem. So you have establish your bearings, And so that kind of sets the setting of the book and really brings the reader kind of into the place of where If Lost takes place, which is heavily influenced by where I currently live in Black Mountain and where I grew up in Davidson County, which is closer to the Piedmont region of North Carolina. And so you kind of get the setting through Establish Your Bearings. And then in section 2, Notice Nature, I try to do a lot more parallels between kind of like human suffering and environmental suffer, and how everything and everyone is kind of lost in some way. And then the Don't Be Afraid in section 3 kind of brings it all full circle and saying, you're probably not as lost as you think you are, and just stay calm and don't be afraid, and you'll be on your way, basically. I kind of use that as the framework for the whole poem and try to keep it very simple on those 3 steps to take if you're lost, metaphorically or physically. I put it at the end just kind of as a way to kind of bring it all full circle.
The characters in your poems, some of them are in very harrowing circumstances there, which made me wonder about how you were actually.
Yeah, I think a lot of the characters, inspired by interactions I've had with people growing up and people that I currently know. Yeah, I think a lot of people do some incredible feats sometimes, and you kind of have to do certain things to find yourself or to find some sort of path of safety in a way. I have a poem in there I think it's titled Mountain Man, from like a grandfatherly standpoint of him knowing all the bear hunters and knowing all the illegal ginseng poachers and stuff like that. I feel like he's one of those characters that I kind of look up to in the book. And then there's a lot of different characters basically, but they've got to do a lot of different things to get through life.
Talk a little about your writing life and how that connects with the rest of your life.
Yeah. So I really started writing poetry in high school. One of my English teachers, I really just latched onto poetry because I'm not a really strong reader. I started really diving into poems and dissecting them for papers and projects and getting into it that way. And then went to college, took a few classes in poetry, didn't major in it, went to college for Parks and Recreation because I wanted to be outside. And so I never really lost track of it. But then out of college, that's when I started forming community poetry groups. My first job was with an arts council. I formed a community poetry group through them. And that was completely free, open to all ages. That was when I really first started connecting with real writing mentors who helped me in my writing and had a major impact on the way that I write and edited my work. And then once I moved to Black Mountain a little over 5 years ago, I really missed that community poetry group. I looked for one here that was very similar to the one that I had started, in the fact that it was free and open and had a regular schedule. And so maybe once or twice a month doing something. And I didn't find anything specifically in Black Mountain, which I found surprising because Black Mountain has a very rich poetry and artistic history. And so I partnered with the library here to create the Dark City Poet Society. That group has taken off like crazy, and it's in all the good ways, but we are a very large group, and it has had even a bigger impact on my work in writing, because we do one critique a month and one poetry reading a month. And the feedback that I get from all these incredible writers has helped me a ton. I'm definitely indebted to them in a lot of ways, and I definitely give them a lot of credit for where my writing is, because I wouldn't be here without their support, really.
Writing is often seen as a solitary exercise. But what about community? How important is community to writers?
Yeah, I think it's vital to writers, because being in a community allows you to feel heard and supported and not so alone or not as crazy as you think you are. We get so many people coming into our groups who are afraid of sharing, which is natural. And, they don't have to share if they don't want to at either meeting, either the critique or the reading. They don't have to share at all. They can just sit and listen if they'd like. But eventually they hear enough of other people's work and they're like, oh, yeah, my poetry is not that crazy. Like they hear other people's stories and the things that they live through, and they see the courage that it takes through those people to share, and they kind of slowly gain up the courage to do it themselves. And so I think it really helps to branch out. I'm an introverted person in a very extroverted role, if that makes sense. But I have to do it to get out of my shell and to learn from others, because it's helped me tremendously. So I've got to do it.
You mentioned you have a day job that keeps you outside. What do you do?
So I'm a recreation coordinator, and so I do a lot of outdoor programming, hikes and river cleanups, and removing invasive species, which plays a big role in the book If Lost. kind of the ways that our ecosystem suffers and in ways that are directly and indirectly influenced by us. And then on top of the outdoor programming, I also do special events. We do like a concert series that I'm in charge of, and some holiday events as well.
Sounds like a pretty busy life. What do you do in your spare time?
I'm writing and reading in my spare time, and then going on hikes with out groups and going swimming in some swimming holes.
You mentioned being kind of an introvert. So tips for other introverts who want to read poetry out loud.
My biggest tip would be to read out loud to yourself and get used to the sound of your voice and reading, just getting used to reading out loud. It sounds a little weird, but I read out loud basically every morning. I'm used to hearing my voice and then going out and just getting experience, because it's different reading to yourself and then getting behind a mic and hearing it reverberate back to you a little bit. So it takes a lot of practice to get used to that. And I still stumble so much on it, and it scares the crap out of me every time I get up behind a mic. So I've gotten a little bit more used to it. I realize it's not, do or die anymore.
The poems you read every morning, is it your own work or do you read other poets?
Oh, definitely other poets, not my own work for sure. I'll maybe do some edits if I feel led to, but mostly reading just kind of some of my favorite poets. A lot of Sharon Olds and Gary Snyder, and a little bit of like old poetry as well with like Walt Whitman. And yeah, just kind of reading more of the poets that I look up to.
The book is called If Lost by Clint Bowman. Clint, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
If Lost is available from Loblolly Press. Clint Bowman still lives in Black Mountain, which was devastated by Hurricane Helene last year. He says the communities around him are slowly rebuilding. He's still writing and facilitating the Dark City Poet Society, and he hopes to have another collection of poetry out in 2026. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Charlie McCoy, Blue Dot Sessions, Hello June, and Tim and Dave Bing. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editors Chris Julin and Nicole Musgrave. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe to our newsletter and stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.